All right, so I'm really excited about this episode because obviously we've been talking about startups and hearing from a number of different consultants, practice owners, but one person or I guess group of people that we haven't really spoken with yet in this startup journey are orthodontists, and so that's where Dr. Minh Nguyen joins us here today, and I'm super stoked to bring you on, man, because you have a really, I feel like, unique story and brand that you're building with your practice. So we're going to definitely share that with the audience. But before we hop into our kind of startup discussion, would love for you, man, to just share a little bit about you and your background and kind of what has led you up to this point of starting your own practice.
Yeah, sure thing. I grew up in Northern Virginia. Local guy, just went to a bunch of schools in the Mid-Atlantic from JMU, VCU, Howard University, West Virginia. And what led up to probably the startup process was never really my intention. Years ago, with becoming an orthodontist. It was like most people that actually probably do startups. It's usually because there wasn't anything available for sale that was suitable for them. And acquisitions were, it just kind of depends on what people's focuses were. When there's just nothing available, push come to shove, and I wanted something to call my own, as soon as possible. Well, there were enough people with my financial planner, and he's like, hey, let's look into the startup route. Let's see where we go from there. And that was probably me in the middle of my second year of residency. And I went in and, okay, let's start doing the research, demographic studies, location, get a general idea so that when residency is over, I can, get the process going. And then we would have dived into that more in this podcast.
Yeah, so I mean, let's start there. So this is happening while you're in orthodontic residency, and you're kind of set on going the startup route. Is that right?
Yeah, it was second year. I went ahead and just I got referred over to a consulting company, Ideal Practices. I'm not paid by them or anything, but they are great. Walked me through the whole process, and I just thought it was a really, really great fit for me. And the more I studied into startups and the benefits of it, despite not always having the immediate cash flow of a $1.2 million office of some acquisition, there's lots of perks to it. Whether it's more brand focused, you can really distinguish yourself a lot sooner. You can control your systems as far as whether it's employees that are not a good fit. You won't have to turn them over or anything like that. You can build it the way you want, very organically. But yeah, right in the middle of residency, I said, forget it. I'm just going to go, all out and figure it out as we go along.
Nice. And just so the audience knows, as we're recording this, Minh has his office. It's being built literally as we speak, and we're definitely gonna go through some of his experiences with that because it's always just so fascinating to hear everybody's journey. But let's start with this. So as you were starting to do, that initial research, kind of figuring out, what direction you were gonna go. I feel like from what I hear from every dentist is, getting started is the hardest point when it comes to an acquisition, whether it comes to a startup, whatever the case may be. What is kind of that starting point that you have found is the best way to kind of get the ball rolling? Is it start with looking at demographics or potential areas that you want to live in, or what does that look like? Kind of just getting the thing going.
Good question. I think the hardest part before you get into locations and demographics, I think every individual has to identify what their actual specific goals are. Because what my goals are and how I want to run a practice and how I want to build a practice or a brand is rather unique and can be completely different from someone else. There are very successful practices that I know of that are like 90% state insurance practices, and they do very high volume with a higher gross revenue, or versus someone that may want like a more 4-chair boutique fee for service, and selective PPO style practice. Well, with all that being aside, every individual has to identify what their goals are, and whether it's more like for myself, brand, look, layout was very, very important to me. Where others, it's probably not a big problem for them, and they just want to have like a practice somewhere. So when I identified what I wanted, that's when we looked at, locations and demographics. The patients that you want to serve, is it in the realm of what you are looking at and possibly wanting to live? So if you decide to build this cosmetic veneers implant practice, but you put it in a more heavy state insurance area, are you really going to be able to do the type of dentistry that you want to do in this area? Well, for me, I got fortunate enough and I was like, okay, the demographics checked out. That Percival, Virginia was just a great fit. It wasn't far from where I grew up. I've seen the place develop a lot in the past few years, actually. And it wasn't until a random drive a couple years ago that I'm like, okay, this area is completely different than what it was 20 years ago. Before it was just the high school and trees. That's all I knew it was for. And I would only go there from the school bus for football games. That would be about it. But now the town is completely different. The patients are great. The whole community is great. It's a good balance between, what I was looking for, like the beginning of like a somewhat rural area, but not too far from suburban, and only about like an hour, 10 minutes away from downtown DC. So it was just a great fit for me.
All right. So we're talking a little bit, about, demographics. And one of the things that was interesting to me that you had mentioned is, rather than just talking about population, some of the things that you had discussed about, being in a high state network insurance where you're maybe going to be more high volume versus maybe more of a private, paying / fee for service type setting. What are some of those things that you're looking at, or you advise other dentists to look at when they're looking at a demographic report? Because it sounds like it goes deeper than just looking at population and families, right?
I'll do my best. I'm not a demographic studies. I don't even, this is my first adult anything. I don't even have a house. I took the business loan before everything else. I think for orthodontists, you do have to kind of see what your current competitors are in this particular region, the age of the other orthodontists in the area. A general dentist doing Invisalign doesn't bother me too much because they're only able to kind of market to those that are within like their own practice. And at least among my friends, they know their limitations. And every time I see them, and one's trying to be a referral partner over in Leesburg, and they're like, oh, I'm only doing the easy cases. Like, don't worry, the other stuff, you can do it. And I'm like, hey, it's cool. Like, I'm not too worried about that one. I think the demographics, I think the ratio that I learned was like 1 to 7,000. I know for general dentists, it was like 1 for every like 2,000 is like an ideal ratio. But 1 to 7,000, I think, was like pretty good. And again, hopefully that 7,000, I guess for me, this goes into identifying what kind of orthodontics then do you want to do? Do you want to do adult cases, multidisciplinary with a prosthodontist, periodontist? Maybe you should be more urban environment. So like DC, you would have a lot more adult patients. I like kids. Kid cases are more fun. I have a little more freedom as far as skeletal changes that I need to, or whether it being expansion or anterior, posterior appliances that can help position the jaws and teeth a little bit better. Adult cases they can be fun, typically harder. You usually have to check up with other disciplines to make sure it's kind of squared away and everything's kosher before moving forward with those. And again, that all goes back to identifying what you're trying to look for. So the environment that worked for me was very, very family friendly. What in your studies, like how many people are own their home, for instance, versus renting. How many people what's the average age of that population, I believe is pretty important. Total retail sales. So you're looking at a little bit of disposable income for orthodontics. Unfortunately, we're kind of more on like the, there could be arguments between a need standpoint and an aesthetic standpoint. Everybody always assumes that there's going to be like, oh, it's just for aesthetics. And you're gonna have plenty of orthodontists that'll counter back, and I'm sure I could always find a way to counter back at it. But it does tend
go
to
into
be
airway
like
and all these other sides of it.
They're gonna fish for a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, I'll kind of stick to like, to what I know, what I'm comfortable with. And all for me, it was just like, okay, you're looking at now how many families are going to the area. What are the trends in this particular region? So are people tending to move towards that direction? Where I did my residency, like the biggest city was Charleston. The population was actually migrating outwards over the past 5-6 years. So if someone was going to be brand new in Charleston, West Virginia, it could be a little bit of a struggle bus. So that one, you might be looking to do more of an acquisition or partnering with somebody. So being able to see what the current trends are and what are your projections going, 10 years forward. Because you're going to be there for ideally 10, 20, maybe 30 years at a time. And don't look at just something that's like 1-2 years away. Like I said, I'm not a demographic studies expert, but recalling back to what, when I was looking at it from my location.
No, that's a great summary. And I think that's the big thing right there is looking at it from a macro perspective, like 30,000 foot view. It's like, yes, this may be what you're seeing today, but nobody can make the proper projections 100%, but trying to project the best you can, population growth, who's leaving, what type of area is it, are jobs coming there? Those are all massive. And I think that was a really good point. Now, the next phase that you obviously kind of get into that I'm fascinated with personally is on the financing side, because that's something, when we work with practices, they already come to us and they pretty much, they already have their financing in place and, from there. But when you were looking at the proper, bank to use for the financing side of it, what are some of the things that maybe you looked for? Do you have any advice for someone who's going to that, and maybe they're starting by going to Bank of America or whoever it is? What are some pointers maybe from your perspective?
Fortunately for me, as a little side hobby during residency after 5 o'clock and not looking at Google Maps and trying to study where current practices were, I was trying to study the financial world as much as I could, mostly because I ironically didn't trust financial planners. Everybody's trying to come through and sell you something and get you to buy some sort of insurance product that you may or may not need, or it could be written in a weird way. But through my studies, I think for first things first, your bank loan is absolutely the gatekeeper to everything. Without money, you could have the best demographic study. You could find the best piece of real estate. You could have the most beautiful logo in the world. It doesn't matter unless you have money. Do not pay cash for it. You have no incentives for working and for $1 million in labor, paying taxes. So it'd be half, and then you have $500,000, and you're just gonna turn it all over to paying all the vendors. For people like myself, where we have lots of student loan debt, is usually the biggest hurdle that people don't understand. Believe it or not, when you work with a certified student loan planner, which I do know some, and be happy to help you out, you have to keep your payments really, really low, or you have to at least have some level of understanding of how the student loan repayment is paid back. So if you keep your payments really, really low, the bank only cares about what are you servicing every single month towards not just your student loans, but all of your debt. So if you have a really bad credit score, you have lots of like credit card debt, you've already purchased, let's say, $1 million house in less than a year out of residency, and maybe like a BMW or a Mercedes, you have lots of monthly expenses that are going out the door. The bank only cares about, after all of those things are paid, what's left back for them. So if you keep those expenses at a very, very minimum, you should be eligible on just your name alone to be eligible for any bank loan. So whether it's probably Bank of America and Provide are probably the two largest banks where they're dental specific for any acquisition or a startup. And that's without any collateral. The hardest part usually as a young provider is to save up as much cash as you can. And that cash is a non-retirement assets. So you can't count your 401k and your Roth IRA accounts. But how much liquidity do you have? That's not necessarily a down payment towards this loan like you're purchasing at home. It's just showing the bank that you're a good saver, you're responsible with money, and you have this pool of money, should this cash reserve essentially, where if you needed to pull something to live off of, you can live off of this reserve and still service the bank loan. And that's really what they're going to care about mostly. So, you can have someone with over $500,000 in student loan debt or no student loan debt, but the person with no student loan debt, if they have no cash on them, they will never get the funding. So that's probably the hardest part. And it's just I recommend for new grads, just live a little bit poor, a little bit longer, just to stash away your cash. You don't know if you want to be an owner or when. Because a lot of times people say they don't want to be an owner, and then like 2 years later, they're like, oh, I'm tired of this practice, and they do. Well, if you're not in a financial position to get that bank loan, you can't get anything else. As far as interest rates right now, when I got mine, was really, really good. That might not be the only thing you want to look for. You probably want to definitely look for more like relationships. How well do you get along with the lender? How flexible are they? Because they're going to know how much construction is going to cost on a national standpoint. They're going to know how much you should be spending for X, Y, and Z, and how much should you be spending on rent, and how much will they even allow you to spend on rent. And being able to work with someone that knows how to keep vendors accountable before they can get paid, particularly the contractor. So it keeps everybody honest amongst each other, just to make it a smooth process.
Yeah, and like you said, it's a true partner. But everything that you're finding there, it starts with the bank. And I was curious because that's the thing that I see get posted in a lot of the dental groups as I'm looking to a startup, but I've got X amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, and they automatically assume because they have that student loan debt that they're not going to be able to get a loan. But from everything that I've heard and then what you just said too, it's like that is not necessarily the case. It's like you said, being able to show that you can save, you can be responsible, with your money, and that's the main thing. Because I think they're expecting you're going to have student loan debt, right? Like it's kind of expected at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Very cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing I want to really talk about too is in orthodontists specifically, and I'm just curious how you've seen this, but are there any things that are different from being an orthodontist in a startup environment versus like maybe some friends of yours or general dentists? Have there been any things that just in conversation or anything that you've talked about? I'm just curious and have no idea if there is, but I would think there would be some differences there.
I haven't had many discussions. I'm probably one of the I'm mostly in the orthodontic world right now, so most of my friends are orthodontists, in different stages of our career. But from the few dental classmates that I've seen they're doing their startups, I think from a patient acquisition standpoint is really different, where I'm trying to go to like PTO meetings and try to volunteer at schools, and I have a very specific demographic that I'm trying to target, where a general dentist, typically when you're a startup, unless you really just don't want to do like any sort of bread and butter dentistry, you'll take anybody that comes through that can afford you and your services. So you're marketing to the general public, where for me, I'm really focused on like a specific age range, like teenagers, moms that want kids taken care of, and that's my main demographic that I like to focus on. From that standpoint, it's a little bit different. I think GP, you could probably grow a little quicker because the cash flow wise, whether it's fee for service or PPO, you collect the money for your services, let's say a month out, where for an orthodontist, in order for it to scale, you have to hit that 2-year mark to get the full collections on a case start. Let's say it was $5,000 or $6,000. You're not going to get all that money until 24 months later. Usually once you hit that 2-year mark for a lot of practices, then it's usually a lot more self-sustaining. Then you can scale it a lot more with whatever way you want and expand, whether it's marketing or more chairs and growth and whatnot.
One thing with orthodontists that we love in particular from the marketing side of things is it's pretty easy to calculate because you just calculate your average start pretty much, right? I mean, if you really boil it down, whereas a GP, it's like, you have so many different, types of patients to average it out, where you might have somebody who needs a lot of restorative work or cosmetic work, and then you have those others who come in for their cleanings and they're fine. They don't have anything else. But from a like marketing and finding out what your cost per new patient is or new start is, I feel like it makes it easier to scale up, because as you get going along, as you've been open for 3 months, 6 months, a year, and so on, if you figure out between the time that you invest at the PTO meetings or volunteering and any maybe digital ads that you're running, and if you see, okay, it costs me $350 or $400 to get a, on average $5,000 start, it makes that like scaling process a lot more predictable, I guess, is the best way to say that. So that's something that I do like from a just orthodontics side of it. You pretty much, it simplifies the treatment down to a start.
Yes, essentially. Yeah, I agree. From a that was one extra perk that was an unintended consequence when I went to orthodontics. The being able to have your cash flow, it's very predictable per person that comes through. There's going to be on average, like 99% of the time, a minimum that you will collect and bill for, versus someone that just comes in twice a year for their hygiene visits, which is fine too. Yeah, so it's like when you know your return on investment, whether it's pay-per-click with Google, social media ads, there's some sort of like more predictable form of return that you can calculate a lot easier per head that comes through.
Yeah, 100%. And at the end of the day, it's a business, and while you're in healthcare, you still have to know your numbers. And I found that as business owner myself, just kind of growing over time. It's like you may think you know your numbers when you're guesstimating, but unless you actually put pen to paper, these are the hard numbers for what it is to acquire a new patient, or whatever here's what your overhead is, and as you scale, your overhead starts to shrink typically, and these are different factors and knobs that you're kind of totally adjusting it all the time. But it's very important. I think everybody listening to this, know your numbers, get really obsessed with knowing what those are, so then where to improve, where to scale up. So that kind of leads me to my next question, which is the fun part. This is brand, and let me tell you, to everybody listening, Minh has a awesome brand, in my opinion, that he's developing, and part of it is because of the story behind it and how you've drawn in your personal interest to it. So I want you to share with your startup personally, the name of your startup, kind of how it came about, and yeah, just share that with the audience, and then we'll dive into a little bit behind the branding.
I'll try not to ramble too much on how that goes about. I'll try to keep it somewhat condensed. I mean, we've talked, lots of times about it as we were kind of building it out. But no, little plug, little Excelsior Orthodontics is the name of the business. When I was thinking of brand names, that's where it kind of has to start. I didn't want to use my last name. My last name is Nguyen. It's the most popular last name, and it's going to be up there with Park and Lee and Kim's with Koreans. It'll be there with Johnson's and Smith's.
Patel.
Patel's with Indians. It's going to be up there. So my name's not going to be very memorable. So good luck finding it if you Google it and whatever the business is. So one, not my last name, not very distinguished or memorable. Two, from a wealth building standpoint, it's very difficult to sell someone's last name. So unless your last name happens to be like Nordstrom or Gucci, those people have they relied on their last name to build a clothing brand. Or Tom Ford, that's a different story. I'll buy Tom Ford if someone gave me the money for it. I'll do it.
I was gonna say, if somebody gives me the money to buy Tom Ford, I sure will.
Yeah,
but I'm not paying for it with my own money.
yeah. Forget it. We'll finance it together. We'll find our bank loan to do that one. So I had to think of something that was memorable. Like, do I go based on location? Is that memorable? Or does it fit what I want? Whether it's like Western Loudoun Orthodontics or Loudoun Valley Orthodontics. And when I was like, then one night I always remembered, it was Stan Lee, who, may he rest in peace, the founder of like Marvel and all of his work. And it was also started with the movie Silver Linings Playbook, where they kept saying the word Excelsior. And, I was like, okay, I had to look up what the meaning was, and it was Latin for ever upward. So one night with, my fiance after 5 o'clock, I spent 5, 6 hours, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I should go with Excelsior. So I spent 5, 6 hours straight just putting random words together: Eagle Stone, West Ridge, something that kind of flows all together, only to conclude, I'm like, I just Googled Excelsior Orthodontics and it didn't exist. And I'm like, well, I'm kind of dumb. Like, why am I looking up like different languages and trying to find what the special meaning was? I'm like, well, this is already pretty cool sounding already. It's a good fit. It's a fun little Easter egg. I usually get around 1 out of 10 people will pick up that, it's actually Stanley's personal slogan. So that's the fun part about it. And at the same time, the way it flows and it sounds unique, a little hard to spell when people first see it. But yeah, Excelsior, it kind of fits a lot of my life and my fiance's life, who's going to be an orthodontist. She's going to start residency. Actually, I don't know if I told you, she's going to start in July over at West Virginia, where I did my training. So in 3 years, she'll be out and be an orthodontist as well. So I decided to build this thing together. All the colors and what I have right now, if you don't mind me sharing more,
No,
all
please.
of that stuff was a little on accident. Let's start with I'll start with the logo. I would do the first thing I would do is just look at what brands do I like the most. So it was like Apple was up there, Nordstrom was up there, Nike is up there, Costco is up there. With typefaces and fonts, what makes certain brands stand out? So then I had to Google, literally, I researched what made a good logo. And it was actually based on Sagi Haviv, a little free plug for him. Not that he really needs it. He is part of the huge group from New York where they created the NBC logo, National Geographic, Animal Planet, Showtime. And he gives these 3 basic rules that I decided, okay, I'm going to follow these rules. Let's stick with it and let's see how well it works. Simple. You should be able to draw it on a napkin. Distinguishable, which makes it memorable. And scalable. Can you make it large? In the digital world now, yeah, there are certain, when you make your logo, are you trying to make it something really, really pretty piece of artwork? Or do you want something that's actually an icon that people can identify with? And in this world, you need your logo to be able to be scaled to be on the side of a billboard or a building one day, but you also need to make it small enough to fit on like a little tiny icon as people are scrolling through it. Just ran those things, fit those rules. And then as far as fonts, again, I could go on and on about this. I would recommend in general, even if you are a pediatric office trying to appeal to kids, I would try to stick with a sans serif fonts. A lot of the luxury brands have turned away from serif fonts like Times New Roman and whatnot, and over to more bold face sans serif fonts where it's more clean, like Helvetica and whatnot. Because from a scalability standpoint and application standpoint, it's much easier to put in something really, really small and also really, really large as people scroll. As most of your websites are going to be mobile when they search you, it's easier to read that in that sort of typeface. And a lot of the luxury brands are actually switching over to a more, like Burberry is one, Saint Laurent has sans serif fonts. The only one that's kind of like stayed is like Tiffany & Co. and Louis Vuitton, for instance. Those stayed more on a serif-based typeface. That's just the logo alone. The colors, I don't know if you want me to keep going more.
Yeah, no, well, and then talk about, with the color choice and kind of from a, your perspective, how are you going through in your mind what the colors should be? Because that's such an important part of everything from inside the practice, outside the practice, and how you're recognized.
Yes, yeah. The color, this all kind of, you can imagine kind of like my life, it's just kind of developed accidentally. It wasn't until me and my fiance were shopping for wedding bands, and we were at King of Prussia Mall, and we walked into a Tiffany & Co. store, and I just looked around. I see the packaging and everything, and I'm like, okay, Excelsior and the way the type font is more on the masculine side of things. The color Tiffany blue, and I was like, okay, well, this is a touch more feminine, and yet a guy coming in here is not very unusual, and it's not socially awkward. So, and we just finished a trip over at Banff in Canada, in which Lake Moraine was basically like the same color. And we're like, hey, this is a nice little fun story where we'll use the Lake Moraine as like our inspiration to create this blue color. But ultimately, the blue combined with neutral colors, we wanted something more timeless, was really our main focus. So like Apple was probably the biggest driving force of that. Nike is actually rather neutral, but yet, to my opinion, their color that I remember of them is actually orange.
Same.
Even though it's like you don't always pick up on it, but it is. It's like, oh, okay, what can we use as a nice little accent that's somewhat memorable? And we'll just stick with it, keep it really, really simple. And we just chose like the closest we can to like Tiffany blue.
Wow. So, I mean, everybody listening to this, like, think about the story that goes behind everything here, from the name of the practice to the logo design to the colors. Like, we don't expect, everybody to be, brand experts or by any means, but it's like, think of, for you personally, what is that kind of journey that, your brand takes you on when you are developing it? Because that's something that you may think, oh, patients aren't really going to care. But if you really live by some of these things and your core values and the way that you hire people on your team, the way that your team acts, all of these things do blend together. And as we are now, I'm a millennial. I don't know if you are, as well, Minh, but
yeah,
technically,
I am.
I'm a millennial. And so there's so much research out there that shows that millennials, who are, I think, now the biggest, buyers, in the world, they care a lot about companies' missions, their stories, like all of these things that we're talking about. Like, these are things that a lot of millennials look at when they are choosing their orthodontist or choosing, a massage therapist or whatever the case is. And we may do it subconsciously as well. And
Correct.
so it's something that, these things, sometimes I think on the surface level, people be like, oh, let's just go to, Fiverr.com, pay somebody $5 to design me a logo. It's like, yeah, you can get one that way, but, this is really, something for 10, 20, 30 years, like Minh said, you need something you're proud of and that you can, really, I guess, connect with. So.
Yeah. Having something that can just stand the test of time when you're fabricating. Try not to, in my opinion, don't follow too much of any trends or some crazy new font. Just something that's really timeless, where it could be applicable. So even if you had to change your business structure and model and target demographic, it can still relate to whether it's kids, adults, and that's kind of like where we went with that approach. Something that if we had to change our pivot in different roles and different positions, that we could. But yeah, just something that's timeless is just what we really, really liked. What we hope to be around for a long time.
Yeah, no, I love the process that you went through with that. Now, one of the things that I kind of want to end on is, everybody who's done a startup or even an acquisition, I always hear of, here are some of the, things that I would tell somebody else, is on that, if they were going on that journey, here's a few of those things. One thing I want to drive home with our audience here, because Minh, I think you can back this up, is you don't have to go at it, go on this journey alone. Like, nobody expects you to know what you don't know. And I know that you, I'm sure, have gotten, advice and help from, mentors, maybe vendors, whatever the case is. But do you want to maybe talk to that a little bit of, as far as if somebody's looking at doing, a startup practice, what are some things that they should look to as resources, or what are maybe some of the things that they should look to potentially avoid some of those common pitfalls that maybe you've seen or, maybe even experienced?
That's a good question. Because I'm not even open yet. So I haven't yet to see the benefits of it. Because right now I'm just like so focused on construction, but at least the process is going. Ultimately, if someone is even contemplating a startup, rule number one, you can never start too early. The average project, if things go perfectly, that means like there's no hiccups in your letter of intent for a space. There's no hiccups in your lease negotiation with the attorneys. and construction is perfect, you could be open in 12 months from the time that you even say, yeah, you found a spot. Let's assume the demographics are done and you're happy with that area. Yeah, but it's not unusual to go 24 months because real estate's going to be the longest process. You're not renting an apartment. You're doing a 10-year term lease with like maybe at least 1 or 2 5-year renewals. It's a brick and mortar space that you're going to be taking. Start the process early. Even if you don't think you are clinically ready, by the time you are actually open, you should be fine. Even that's including any new grad. Well, for the orthodontic world, I say start it. Don't wait too long after residency to really start thinking about it and like mentally, say, hey, I'm going to focus on a startup. Because it'll be about 2 years before they're actually open. So by the time you have that 1 year of experience, you're like, oh, okay, I know what I know and I'm ready to go off on my own. Some resources to look out for. Contact people like you, for instance, start with that, or you're involved in lots of startups and you'll have your opinions on some things that worked and some things that didn't work for certain offices. And you've seen plenty of spaces and just general looks overall of different businesses. It's like, oh, okay, that kind of fits, and this one works a little bit better. Speak to as many consultants as possible. Ideal Practices was a great fit for me. They have, you're not just hiring one person, but you're hiring a group of people, and each individual person is a specialist of their particular field. But there's lots of other consultants as well that do lots of startups. When you have someone that you can align with, particularly someone that's done this multiple times and where startups are not unusual for them, they've already seen tons of mistakes, or they might have even, done the mistakes themselves for one project. They won't necessarily tell you that, but they'll try to veer you away from it. You'll have a plethora of teams. If you can, I do highly recommend dental specific team members, a dental specific marketing company for one that, yeah, you could go on Fiverr. I don't recommend it. You want to have a full conversation about like what your ultimate goals are and what kind of practice you want to build. Have a dental specific realtor, attorney, interior designer, an architect, people that have done this multiple times where it's not unusual for them. If you were going to get a heart surgery, you don't want someone that's only done maybe like 2 heart surgeries in their life. You want someone that does this for a living, from a regular basis. And all of them will have their own context as well of people to talk to. I think talking also to people that have already done startups from different career standpoints. Someone that is 1 year out, in the middle of construction, 5 years out, 10 years out. At what point did they get like their return where it was more self-sustaining? I think is a great idea. And if you can actually, if you have the time for it, study different demographics of different offices and try to focus on the one that you think is most fit. So a lot of my friends actually don't want to come out to where I am. They don't want to live there. It's quieter. It's more family focused, where a lot of my friends, they want to go to like Arlington, Alexandria. A friend of mine just like built a brand new office out in Alexandria. I'm like, great for them. I had no desire to go out there. So I think also planning out, I guess for the last one, I got this advice from another orthodontist actually. She said, think about your life 10, 15 years from now. Don't think about it what it is next year when you're 26 years old and you can go to K Street or something, get Ruth's Chris like every single night, or you can just go out and do whatever you want. But think like if you plan on having the suburban family lifestyle, start planning it that way in the very beginning. Don't put yourself on 18th Street. That's not really the ideal place to have a child and raise a family. So position yourself in a place that's going to be more family friendly. Because I don't have any kids right now, but I believe you do, Shane. Your life is really, really different. It's no longer your life. It's really about them. And then, as this orthodontist told me, her life was office, PTO meetings, Saturday baseball games. She has plenty of money to do Ruth's Chris every night and eat out. But with 4 kids, she's like, I'm not doing that. Like, this is my life right now. she has more money than she probably ever imagined. And she's like, no, this is my life. Like, think of it that way. So always plan with the end in mind that, you're going to grow out of that going out phase at some point, hopefully. And if the family life is what's for you, and that's what it is for us, that's what you just planned on from the very beginning.
Yeah, man, that's really solid advice, because we're in a world today where everything's today, or very instant, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to think sometimes about the future and who will I be, who do I want to be. And I always, a mentor of mine always told me, he said, you be yourself, but you also want to become the person you envision yourself being 10 years from now. And that was always really powerful to me, because we're always told, be yourself, be yourself, be yourself, which you want to be yourself. Like, don't get that wrong, but you also want to become an ideal person in your head too, right? Like, there's something you want to be. And for me, that was a dad, and being, a family guy that, 10 years ago, that wasn't me, but that was what I knew I wanted to become. So I think that that's just as important as when you're setting up your location, be thinking about that, who do you want to become, and make sure that's aligning with, location and demographics of where your practice is. One last thing I wanted to ask, just because I think that we get so much in our little silos every single day. We work hard, and dentistry and dental marketing even can be exhausting sometimes. By the weekend, we're just like, But I want to ask, do you have, a mentor or any mentors, or do you recommend that dentists, look for a mentor, and how valuable, I guess, have you seen that? And it just reminded me when you were talking to this orthodontist, it's like getting advice from somebody who's been there, done that. So I'm just curious if you have one, and what your thoughts are on that.
I have two. One was actually my orthodontist. I was a 4 bicuspid extraction case when I was a teenager, and I actually didn't meet him again until, like, I guess I'll say 15 years later, when I was in dental school and he was a faculty. Wow. I had no intention of being an orthodontist when I started dental school, but I talked mostly as Dr. Vu over at Howard University. He was trained up in Yukon in the 80s under, like, one of the best biomechanical experts ever. I forgot his name. I really should know that name. I read his book. But anyways, yeah, he's one. I talk a lot about clinical cases and mechanics with him. Probably the one that is most influential for me is actually out in West Virginia in residency. It was Dr. Ronnie Sparks at Sparks Family Orthodontics in Charleston, West Virginia. He's probably, I'll say, 90% influence on how I do things from a clinical standpoint, business standpoint. He's a 1 doctor, 2 location practice. I've yet to meet, very few people are an excellent combination of clinical skills and business skills and understanding the financial world. And he always said that I reminded a lot of him. I know more about the financial world at my point in my career, way more than he did. He kind of learned it with the School of Hard Knocks. But he's probably one of the few amazing orthodontists that, like, the orthodontic world has no idea he exists. His clinical skills, like, superb, and then combined with his meticulousness of his books, basically, are just very, very clean and organized. And we took him out to dinner, myself and the financial company, just to pick his brain a little bit. And my financial company, they were really, really skeptical as far as, like, okay, how is it possible this guy knows his stuff? And they picked his brain, and at the end of dinner, they were just like, hey, no wonder you know as much as you do about finances. I mean, I get to work with him for like 3 years straight. And then it's like, okay, no wonder he had, Minh had such a great foundation to, like, veer off on his own, to, like, study his own thing. But yeah, Ronnie Sparks Family Orthodontics is wonderful. Look forward to hopefully seeing him soon again.
That's awesome. Yeah, man. It's having the right mentor, having somebody like that who can kind of teach you the ropes and be there for you throughout your entire journey is super important. And a lot of people, don't get one because maybe they're afraid they're going to, be bothering that person or something. But in my opinion, what I have found is a lot of people are honored to be able to kind of guide someone and who was in a similar situation as them. So, don't be afraid if there's somebody that you kind of look up to in the field in your community. Maybe reach out and offer to take them out to dinner and, pick their brain. I think that's ultimately super beneficial.
Yeah, I think older dentists and orthodontists, everyone that's like a senior, they get their ego stroked a little bit when they know that someone looks up to them in, subconscious fashion or form. And if everyone likes to talk about themselves. So you just ask them, how did they start? How did you grow to be so big? And then, how are they doing this? How are they doing that? They're more than happy to share it with you. And people are actually probably more welcoming to helping others the next generation, more than the other way around. Everybody's just always very helpful to help out one another, especially in the dental world, or really probably in most careers, as long as the person asking is very, I think, sincere and motivated. The person giving the advice can feel that, read it, and is more than happy to give.
Minh, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And if anybody's listening to this and maybe they want to reach out and ask you a couple of questions, maybe they're going through the same process. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
You could probably just shoot me an email. This is Dr. Minh, DRMINH at Excelsior orthodontics.com. That's simple.
And we'll have that in the show notes in case you do need help spelling it.
Yeah, people are welcome to email me anytime. Try to get around to checking it. And whether it's startup process, acquisition, finances, student loans is probably the most popular one where people reach out to me the most, that I help out with. I'm more than happy to help out anybody anytime.
And one thing, you have a podcast? We need to maybe mention this really quickly here.
Yeah, we just started our own. So it's full disclosure, it's sponsored by CFS Dental Division. We have 14,000 clients all across the country in some way, fashion, shape, or form, whether it's an insurance product or full-on retainer, fee-only fiduciary business, in which the owner was like, hey, let's create a podcast. And I'm like, okay, I don't know how to do that, but we're going to figure it out. It's called Dental Dummies. You can catch us full episodes on YouTube and short-term content by request on Instagram. This is so YouTube would just be youtube.com/@dentaldummies, and Instagram would be @dentaldummies podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man, for sharing this with our audience. I'm excited to watch your journey. I just feel like hit it off from the time we first chatted, and I'm excited to watch your journey, watch your success, and thank you for hopping on here and sharing with our audience.
Oh, thanks for having me on the show, Shane. Yeah, we'll talk soon for sure.